So, as we often welcome to Bad Boy Running, firstly, and we've got a friendly face returning, one of the original podcasters with us, and someone who you've heard throughout my time before he was even a great trail runner, which he now is, in addition to a great obstacle racer and a great ultra runner. And just a great bloke. So, welcome to the podcast, the wonderful Jon Albon.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back, Ethan. Welcome back. So we've just been catching up about bloody COVID. So you've had it straight after Mont Blanc, and it's been a bit of a pisser, really. It seems.
It's not fun for anyone, but I'm definitely happy that I had whatever light therein is going around now, rather than like a year and a half ago. So I guess that's one small silver lining, and also it's nice that I'm having it now as opposed to in 3 or 4 weeks' time when I'll be down in Chamonix preparing for the CCC. So another small silver lining there, and I guess everyone's going to get it at some point. So I've just had my turn, you know.
Did Hen catch it as well?
Henrietta already had it in, when was it? Well, she was emo racing down in the Pyrenees at the European Championships. So that was sort of early spring. So she kind of already went through it then. And she's like been sort of dealing with some sort of not symptoms, but like low energy and trying to get back into training, and then still racing as well and stuff since then. So it's like definitely been good for me to see what she's gone through and then try and learn a little bit for my own experience.
Yes, it's so annoying that because it almost felt as if COVID has fleed us from like the healthy and the fit and now fine, but actually it's having such a big impact on the racing season, because so many of the races I've been following, everyone's catching it at some point in the last year, and it's just almost a matter of luck. And you're now having to make these decisions where turning up to a race is the biggest risk of your season almost, because that catching COVID is the thing that then just stagnates your training.
Yeah, it's like it's tough because definitely when you go to a race, you mix with a lot of people. You might live in like a sponsor house with a bunch of other athletes. If one person gets something, everyone gets it. And you need to do some races to get in the right shape to then perform really well at other races. So you need to have some sort of races built into your training plan in order to perform really well. So you need to do the right amount of racing, but obviously too much is too much risk for the getting sick, and too little can leave you not prepared. So yeah, there's lots of things to juggle when you're preparing for races anyway, and that's just like an extra one that gets thrown at you.
Is that something that you had considered previously, or are you now just very aware? I guess now that you've had COVID, hopefully that gives you a bit of a buy for a month or two, fingers crossed. But I mean, is that something you will now be considering in your scheduling?
Yeah, I think like I am a bit more relaxed about getting it now, because obviously I've just had it. So hopefully that gives me 2 or 3 months where I hopefully wouldn't get it no matter who I mix with. So that means when I go down to Chamonix 3 weeks before the CCC, I will be confident that I can like relax a little bit and it won't suddenly hit me. But who knows? Like I think being an athlete, you need to just roll with the punches sometimes. And that's definitely going to be like how I have to try and get back into training, because I am back into training now, but it's like you got the energy levels, you got the feeling, you've got like elevated heart rate, and just like everything's a bit off, and you've got a lot of people telling you to take it super easy, but then you know you're going to run 100 kilometers in 5 weeks. It's like, well, you can't take it easy then, you need to be prepared. So much to sort of try and think about and manage. And I mean, being an athlete, you're walking like a little tightrope anyway. And this is like made it even thinner.
Yeah, completely. Well, a few weeks ago, where you caught the COVID, Mont Blanc, winner of Mont Blanc. Congratulations!
Thank you very much. It was a good run. I think I had a good day thinking back on it.
How do you, now you've had a bit more time to, I guess, reflect? Like, how does that fit within your portfolio of wins?
Probably one of the best execution races I've had, best like competitors I've been racing against and stuff, and just generally like I felt like I was really well prepared for it as well. So like just really high up across the board, and definitely like over the moon to have actually executed that well and won. So really happy.
And what really struck me, because I mean the race itself. So do bad. If you haven't seen the race, go onto YouTube. It's fantastic because you're in fifth at one point. Then Remy kind of took up. Then you're flagging a little bit. It seems at the bottom of the first hill, behind Robert and Petru, and then you just, I mean, it was a battle the whole way until kind of 2/3 of the way through, really.
Yeah, I definitely, it helped being paced at the front by people that maybe were just going to go as hard as they could until they died, and then they did die, and it actually paced me into having a good lead over like serious contenders like Davida. So it was actually sort of like that worked out really well for me because it turned out that my pacing, training, nutrition strategy, everything sort of came together and allowed me to continue at not as fast as we'd started, but still a good pace. And that meant I could then go ahead and take the win. So everything went to plan. Like I'd already envisaged all the sections of the course and how I wanted to run them and where I might be and how I was going to execute each individual section. And I did just that. So it was sort of like 4 mini races and I did them all like as well as I could do.
Because you said to me the day before that you wouldn't know until kind of 2 miles in whether your legs were up for it almost, and that was the point that you'd actually be able to assess whether you thought you would be able to race well. Is that normal for you?
Yeah, I think like in skimo racing, literally within 100 meters, it's like good day, bad day, and it's like night and day, And in this, like after half a K, I turned to Demi and was like, this seems slow. And he was like, I think it'll speed up. And actually looking back on it, we were running a really good pace. So it just meant that I was feeling good. And then that's sort of like when I know I'm going to have a good day, I'm smiling. It feels easy, smooth, controlled. And we hit a climb and I'm not suddenly dropped or sort of like going into panic mode. So I did generally feel good. I actually felt pretty crap the entire week before and really was like psyching myself out and stuff, but that's what I normally do to myself anyway. So I knew I had good shape from the training block I'd had and like the 6 months worth of training I put in for this race. So I knew I had good shape, but then you can't help but convince yourself in the week before that you don't deserve to be there and you're going to race crap. So it's nice as soon as the gun goes that you just get into racing mode and you can forget about training, forget about everything else and just run, and then everything becomes a bit more simple.
And how do you, because you've mentioned how you were saying you were fortunate to be running with Juan Carlos and Robert, and who were running until they collapsed. I mean, literally in Petru's case, Petru Mamu ended up on a stretcher at the end. I mean, how do you regulate your pace, given that you don't race that frequently? You race lots of different style races as well. So how do you know you're running at a sensible pace for you on the day?
I mean, it's a tough question. Everyone's got a different level of pacing themselves, and I think I've got a pretty good one now over the years of just being able to sort of like run just beneath threshold sort of thing, or just around threshold, and just as soon as you hit a hill, kind of like throttle back a little bit, and as soon as you hit a downhill, kind of like you let your legs fly, and always just hold yourself just around that sort of effort level zone. And I do a lot of my training off RPE, so off effort level, rather than off a certain pace. And I think that then really helps that I know exactly what pace I can hold for what amount of time and how it should feel when I'm going both uphill and downhill. But yeah, I'm just glad that it happened on the day, that it didn't feel so bad to follow those guys, because it was a really runnable start and they are really good runners. So to be in contention with them was just like a great feeling. And then it just set me up for sort of the rest of the race, which is really important for me. I need a good warm up before the first proper climb, and we had a good 13k warm up for 700 climb before Presets. So that was like the course suited me, and I think that showed in the end.
And something that I can't remember exactly what said afterwards, but it struck me you almost have imposter syndrome about being like winning a race like that. And there was, I can't remember if it was when we were just chatting or whether it was in the interview where we were dissecting the race afterwards, but it struck me that it felt like you almost thought, right, finally, I've got a race which is like two fingers up to all the people saying, I'm an obstacle racer who got lucky on a few trail races. I mean, is there an element of that, would you say, or?
Yeah, I did kind of feel like that. I do sandbag myself a little bit. I think that is important for my training, for my sort of development as an athlete. But I do think I haven't given myself that much credit for wins I've had before, or definitely I feel like other people haven't given me much credit. And to win this race, because a lot of people do see the Golden Trail Series as sort of like the pinnacle of competitive trail running. So to go on win, especially against Davida, who was only just a few minutes behind Killian, way under the course record in Zagama like a few weeks before, like it did show to myself a little bit that maybe I do deserve to be where I am, and maybe I am a half decent trail runner. And also I think it legitimized back in some of the races I've done previously. So it's sort of like it says, okay, these races you've done before, you did pretty well then as well, probably, because you can kind of like backdate that legitimacy. So I think like it was a great win, and I'm going to try not to let it go to my head either. Like it's onwards and upwards, eh? So,
But which do you think came first, the self doubt about your position within the community, or the external assessment of your races within the scene?
I think generally I've always thought of myself as being a good athlete, but not like an absolutely great one. Like especially over the past years, it's always been there's the Killian bracket, which is just Killian. Then there's the Stian Ungermans and the Davidas and stuff, that bracket. Then I always felt like I was the bracket beneath. And I do think that was an honest assessment. I really do think that's where I deserve to be. But in the past 2 years, I said I want to push up a bracket, and I've dedicated more time, more energy to trying to get up a bracket. And I do feel like it is actually sort of coming to fruition. I'm actually seeing myself sort of like moving up through those brackets. But I mean, obstacle racing, I was with obstacle racing, like I started at the very beginning, like tough guy, no one did obstacle racing, no pro athletes, no money, nothing. And then it grew and it grew and it grew, and I was winning like pretty much everything. But I was telling myself, well, it's a nothing sport. No one's doing it. So I'm just winning because no one else is doing it. And I guess that sort of just mindset has stuck with me all the way through to doing races at the Trail World Championships. I just convinced myself that all the best athletes weren't there, or this or that, or I just had a good day and they had a bad day. There's always something you can tell yourself, which will make you sort of like not give yourself as much credit as maybe you deserve. But then that has also kept me hungry. It's kept me pushing hard in training. It's kept me wanting, and it's kept me like thirsty to improve. So I think it has been really important for my development as an athlete as well.
And I mean, and there's certainly an element with the World Trail Champs that, other than maybe Killian, the winner, to a certain extent, is determined by the course each year, because you go to Wales and Ricky Lightfoot smashes it by 10 minutes or something, and you're like, well, of course he does. That's not his home territory, but in terms of the terrain, that's what he's incredible at. And so there certainly is an element for everyone who wins it that they've been the best on that course. But trail is so broad that you really can, even in the Golden Trail Series, the technicality of something like a Dolomis run versus the speed of a Sierra Zanal is completely different races. So you've mentioned that you've been focusing a lot on this then in the last 2 years. So does that mean you've been switching focus from your obstacle race training to this, or does it mean you've actually been training more more in total?
I think generally over the past 2 years, a lot has changed, and like just everything. Like we moved further north in Norway. Henrietta quit her job and became a full-time athlete, so we were living more of an athlete lifestyle together. I started seeing actual mountain trail athletes training, Killian being the main one, seeing how they train and the dedication they have, especially Eden Ilson, the dedication she has, the time she's putting in, just the sort of, dedication is maybe the only word. Like it's incredible to see. I've always kind of thought that like you should be embarrassed if you concentrate on training for mountain races too much. You should just go and have adventures in the mountains, and And that's great and everything, but actually, if you do really want to improve, you need to actually dedicate yourself like a lot and make a lot of sacrifices, and that's what I started doing. So everything just became a little bit more serious. Became a bit more boring, but then if you want to win races, that's almost what has to happen. I changed training philosophy based off like what I was seeing from other athletes. I got my foot fixed, and now I could run a lot more, especially in the winter. And in the past 6 months, I got an altitude tent as well. So that sort of like helps a lot for the acclimatization. Like a lot of stuff.
And talk to me about this philosophy then, because from my impression of your philosophy previously was you do a lot of cross training. I love little stories where you'd have a cup of coffee, and every time the alarm went off, you'd do 10 pull-ups or something, and then you wouldn't stretch, you'd do rock climbing instead, but you'd still do hard session. Like what's changed within that?
So I think like I've gone through all the stages as an athlete. I've gone through the accidentally getting in shape because you just commute to work and you sort of do a bit of training here and there, and it happens sort of like by accident. I've gone through you get into shape accidentally by just racing a lot, and then you end up getting in shape because you're racing a lot, and that's good training. And then I went through a phase of trying to be like, I'm going to train properly, which is, in my mind, was always 80-20. I'm going to do 80% really slow, 20% really fast because it's scientifically proven, And then actually from doing research, seeing people like Killian train, and then having lots of in-depth conversation with Henrietta, who reads just about every book she can get her hands on sort of sports science and training. And I kind of realized that there was a better way for me, and there was sort of a lot of things that I was missing. So I changed my philosophy to suit, and the improvements I've had over the past 2 years have been absolutely crazy. And training is a lot more fun, and I'm recovering better. Like everything just has been generally better. So, I mean, that's been really fun to see the fact that you can learn so much over sort of a 10, 12-year career is really cool. And then the fact that I never had a coach to tell me what to do. So I've made all these mistakes, and I've learned so much myself, and I've tested and I've sort of experimented, and I found a system that I think really works for obstacle, trail, and mountain running, which is, it's a philosophy for those sports. It's not like a road running or track running philosophy that then you just put on steroids and do loads of, because the running endurance races in the mountains is completely different to running on the road or running on the track. So I think the training has to be completely different as well.
I love the fact you're saying you've made loads of mistakes during the course of winning 5 double world obstacle race championships, to give an insight then of, because you've mentioned that your recovery is better. You've mentioned that your training is a far higher level, but you've not really said. Can you give any specifics of an example of how say someone like myself, if I was to go into training for long distance, I'd do a tempo run, I'd do an interval session, I'd probably do a weight session a week, and then everything else would be pretty slow, with one mid-size long, one long at the weekend, something along those lines. Like, how have you changed from that kind of? I've got a weird cat staring at me. You're trying. It's so weird. Can you see?
It's probably hot.
Yeah, I think they want to. I don't know if they want to join us or. Anyway, sorry. They just look evil.
The most important question, everyone's sitting on the edge of their seat, like, I really want to know what the secret is. And then David's like, cat.
Sorry. We've got an evil cat, and then I thought this was a good cat, but this is the evil cat. Anyway, so yeah, how would your structure or how would your sessions alter from that?
The first thing is I don't think there's any like magic bullet for any one person, and I don't think one training philosophy is going to be right for anyone. It might be actually loads of different training philosophies are right for people over the years, and sometimes just a change in training philosophy can be what you need. But I went from trying to do everything really slow, but then 20% sort of like really hard. I went from that to using a much broader spectrum of everything in between. And then I change that sort of ratio of those different intensities depending on 2 things: how much training I can do and when my races are in the year. So it was all about this combination of the different intensities. And then I've broken it down into sort of like a relatively easy system to understand, because that's the beauty of 80-20. You can just say to someone 80-20 and it's like, oh, great, all my worries have been, it's so easy, like, oh, magical. But it really doesn't work like that. I think even pro track and road runners, they don't really follow 80-20. Like, how do you break up all those intensities and then just say 80-20? Like, I don't think it really ever does actually work quite like that. And that's the biggest thing, like, for me to see that. It's like, oh, like, I need to use the intensities in the middle, because that's where I'm going to be racing. That is my race effort level, my race pace. And I need to build efficiency at those speeds and effort levels, because I'm going to be spending 3, 4, 5, 10 hours racing at those. And I actually turned out that in my previous training, I was never running at the intensity that I was going to be racing at, which looking back on it is just stupid. So it's about this ratio of what intensities, or what sort of concoction of intensities and when. So in the winter, I do a lot more zone 2 than I would have done before, because I think with 80-20, like zone 2, this kind of middle, moderate, steady kind of effort, you're not really meant to do. It's too in the middle.
I thought
So
zone
doing
2
a lot
was your
more
80.
of that. Yeah, so this is like, everyone's got a different way of looking at it. And that's why 80-20 works. It just depends on what you think of the 80 is being made up of. So you've got a certain amount of zone like 1, certain amount of zone 2, certain amount of zone 3, certain amount of zone 4. I don't really use 5 because that's like far too hard, really. Like, if I'm going to be going that hard, it's for 20, 30 seconds. My heart rate never gets up anyway. So it's like the combination of those. And I've never really found 80, just saying 80 sort of like does it for me. I need to sort of like know a bit more of a breakdown, because when you can run relatively fast, that's like a massive spectrum that someone's just saying 80. And it's like, I don't really like know what you mean. Like, how much should I spend at each intensity? So having a certain concoction of effort levels in the winter when you're not racing, and then changing that concoction a certain amount of weeks, so that's 6 to 8 weeks out of your race, is really important. So that way you can like save that hard training, save the Rocky Balboa focus where you really want to smash training until before the race. And that way you can like keep your shape really well. So I ended up breaking down the year into sort of different training phases: base building in the winter, sharpening before the race, and then tapering into the race and recovery afterwards. And coming up with what I thought was the perfect concoction of these effort levels in the different training phases, dependent on how much time or training I could actually recover from. Because I think if you've only got 3 hours to train per week, that concoction of intensity levels is going to be really different to someone that can train 30 hours in a week. So it's like looking at those two things and making the plan, and then making something, a system that I could actually follow. So that's where the app came in. Me and a friend started working on this app so I could use it myself, so I could actually like plan with it. So we made the app, and it's like really helped my training like phenomenally. So.
And actually, for most people, if you're only training twice a week, then 80-20 is such a weird concept. Like, just go 100% hard, because actually, why not? You're going to get it could be a ghost cat. It's quite refreshing actually. The hottest day of the year, so bit of a draft. Mr. Briggs has just walked in. And does this mean then? So, because you won, was it OCC last year?
Yes.
Yeah, which was brilliant result, and great race to watch actually, with you and Robbie kind of nearly neck and neck until that last kind of down. Does this mean then are you now committing to trail away from obstacle in a way that you haven't before?
Yeah, I think like that's something that happened over the past 2 years as well. I just found that if I wanted to really know how my legs feel and really train well and be able to react on if my legs or my energy levels feel good or bad, it meant I had to race less and do less obstacle racing. Because obstacle racing, it's like being dragged through a bush backwards with someone hitting you with a baseball bat. You know, afterwards you don't really know how your legs feel. You just jumped off like 20 walls. You've carried like a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
You've been like dragged through fire, cold water. Like, you don't know how your body feels. And it's really important if you're going to perform at races like Marathon Mont-Blanc, that for a period of time before that race, that is your main focus and all your effort level goes into training for that race. I mean, it's kind of boring, but any sport that once it gets serious enough becomes a little bit less fun. And that's kind of like what it has to be like, because I mean, high level sport isn't as fun as just normal sport and it's not as healthy either. But that's just sort of, if you do want to perform really well, you have to make sacrifices.
But with because one of the big draws about obstacle race was that they've got 2 or 3 different championships that can just pay out your year's salary, and then every now and then Spartan will come and do some stupid bet, but you might have a chance of winning 100 grand or something. Like, what kind of pressures have you felt, and what has been? Are you reaching because you want to improve, or because of credibility, or because is it financial, or like what are kind of the factors in your decision to focus more on trail? Or is it that Killian's getting old and they're looking for a new Norwegian-based non-Norwegian runner?
No, I think I had a good answer all lined up, and now I've actually forgotten the question because you added on that joke at the end. What was the question? Just give it to me in 3.
I guess because if from my position, you've been in this almost lovely situation where.
Oh, okay, yeah, no, I got it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but you've had the finance of obstacle.
Exactly. Before, I had to win lots of races in order to survive as an athlete, because I had a poor relationship with sponsors. I didn't want to sell much of my soul. I wasn't really sure how to sort of like.
You've sold out.
With
Instagram. Now you've sold out. You're like, fine.
I think like not selling out, but just sort of becoming more comfortable with who I am as a person, so that I can make these decisions. Whereas before, it was like, if I win loads of prize money, then that's sort of like a safe bet. Whereas there is less prize money in trail, but then sponsorship opportunities are more. But I still really try and weight quality of gear and what I need as an athlete in order to be able to perform how I want to, as well as a lot of other factors, as well as the money side of things. So it definitely has transferred in the fact that now I need to make less money through prize money, and I can make more through just standard money from sponsors and also the bonus schemes if I do well. But that's something I was half worried about into this year, because I kind of get this idea that some athletes, they get a big retainer, then they don't have to win. Like, was that going to happen to me? Could I just turn up to a race and go, I get paid anyway? Like, will I lose that sort of hunger of really wanting to push? Like, I was unsure. Yeah. So I'm happy that I seem to just as intent on performing as well as I think I can, or as well as I deserve to be, whether I'm going to sort of like be able to pay the bills by the end of the month or not.
I say the only athletes that's probably a factor, though, are either Red Bull, because Red Bull do some pretty juicy long-term contracts, or if you win UTMB and then you suddenly get a North Face or similar, I think that's when you're like, yeah. Oh, sorry, you've just got a North Face, actually, haven't you? So maybe it's applicable to.
No, I don't think it's like a night and day black and white thing. I think it's just that extra 0.5% that you need to really just destroy yourself or go through that amount of pain or that amount of focus you need, not just in the race but in the whole build up. And it's just whether you have that sort of even extra 0.1%. So I don't think it would ever be consciously that people go, I've made it now, that's it, I don't need to try anymore. Everyone wants to do well, obviously, but there is that sort of like magical extra tiny bit that you need to give of yourself in order to really do well.
And are you, because you've done incredibly well at Mont Blanc. We've talked about Sierras now, and Stranda Fields coming up, local race, but then DCC is your big focus. Like, how are you? What is it that decides your season?
Many different things. Like, to be honest, normally I've just sort of like picked and choose races that look fun. Like previously, I guess there was always some level of how much prize money, whether it be this one or that one, but then that was just like, all the obstacle racing championships races that just look interesting and fun. Before, I used to think a lot about how high races are. And it's like, if it's going to be at 3,000 meters, I'll perform crap because that's just how I perform at 3,000 meters. Now with the elevation tent, maybe a little bit less so. But really, it's just those big races that I think I can do well at and I want to experience. Hence why Zagama was on the list, but actually that got taken off. Sierra Zanal has always been on the list. I really enjoyed OCC last year. The UTMB week is something to experience. So that's why I was back to the CCC, and hopefully that will be an extra rung in the ladder leading up to UTMB. But really, there's normally one or two races that I just think I really want to do those, and then see what other races will get me in shape for those big races. But really, I mean, when it comes down to it, I just ask Henriette and she tells me. So that's the easiest answer.
To get Hen on. So actually UTMB is the ultimate, that's where you're headed.
I would like to do UTMB. I think I think I could do well. Who knows? I think it would be an interesting experience. I think it's something I want to experience at some point in my life, and it does seem like a really big challenge. But then it is really far, and it's like, why is running so far? It's not really good for you. It's not that fun. I'm not really sure what the draw is, but definitely there is a draw there just to see if I can. So I'd hope for next year. I do still have to qualify, and I have to learn a lot more about myself and nutrition and how I handle certain situations and stuff. I mean, I've done 105 miles in a wetsuit in the desert outside Las Vegas. So, I mean, hopefully I could manage it on the trails around Mont Blanc, but who knows?
Well, that's the thing. In terms of slugging it out, you've been there. You've done far weirder, harder, coped with stranger conditions. But I guess it's just that difference between being able to move fluidly rather than just slog it out, because that's kind of the key, isn't it, towards the end of your UTMB, still being able to get that stride length, to get, a bit of a pace downhill when needed. And
yeah, I think there's a lot of different pieces of the puzzle which are required to really nail a race like that, or even just any 100-miler, which I've developed less than the ones that I have for sort of more around 5-6 hours racing. Like last year, I did 80k at Templiers, and that was a really great race. But I definitely feel like the type of preparation I did and how I executed that race would probably be very different to how it's going to be in the 100k. Quite similar, but still a bit different. But the difference between 100k in the CCC and UTMB is night and day. I think it's a completely different type of athlete, almost different strategies. It's more of a survival game than an athletic kind of pushing from the start. And that's sort of a very different style of racing that I would need to get used to. But I do generally feel that, especially in the 100-mile distance, it's going to get more racy. Ironman used to be about survival, and now it's about pushing from the start, and times have really got quicker rapidly. And I'm assuming that's going to be the exact same as nutrition strategies get better, competition gets better, shoe technology improves. We're going to see sort of 20 hours needs to be broken in order to win UTMB almost easily. So I kind of can see that happening in the future, and it's going to be fun to be a part of it if I prove myself worthy.
And do you get a sense that things like nutrition will be similar to doing your toughest mudder 24-hour, or is it very different because of the aid stations, because of you're not getting the breaks in the same way switching to upper body? Or
I don't know. To be honest, I can't even. With World's Toughest Mudder, you'd roll in half delirious, freezing out your mind, and someone would be pouring chicken noodle soup down your wetsuit. That's exceptionally different to how it would be with UTMB. I think I could be a lot more calculated with how many carbs per hour, when I can get those carbs, how much drink I'm taking on. I think definitely with some races beforehand of a similar distance, or maybe slightly shorter, and some good simulation runs, I could come up with a much better strategy than someone sort of just throwing Cliff gels at you and then see if you can squirt some of them in.
And because my instinct, based off your previous races and how I've seen you do in them, I actually think you'd be the multi-day king, because you seem to be so much better at recovery because of your OCR kind of training, but also just a better core and strength training than most runners. Like, is that something where, we saw Tom Evans go out, take a third out at the MDS on his first attempt, and I'd rate you as better suited to it, just in terms of where you are as a runner now. Like, is that something you consider, those types of races?
Yeah, I haven't actually thought too much about the multi-day stuff. Like, I've often thought that, like, normally sort of up to a certain extent, the shorter races in trail and mountain are the more competitive, and then the longer you go, the less competitive they are. And I've kind of kept myself. I've kept
Other than
myself
UTMB, yeah.
I mean, that is kind of the way it goes, So I'm not saying that multi-day races aren't competitive, and I'm not saying like the athletes aren't absolutely nails. It's just I haven't had this sort of like being drawn to it, mainly because running isn't that good for you in the quantities we're doing it, and running and getting that stiff and that swollen and then doing it the next day and the next day and the next day, it just feels like just horrible for your body. Like, I've done multi-day ski races, like I did Pyramenta this year, and it was completely different because there's no impact. So you get really tired in your engine, like your heart and your lungs, you just feel like really tired, but you're still relatively fresh muscular wise. So
but weirdly, something like the MDS on sand, you finish it fairly fresh because you've been running conservatively because of the heat, but you are on something quite gentle as well.
Yeah, so the sand especially is probably something I wouldn't enjoy that much. I don't like sand anyway. And my experience with Spartan World Champs last year was actually, to be a good runner in soft sand, you should be a good cyclist, because it's more like leg strength and power and sort of that sort of leg turnover rather than a really nice running stride. There's not much point going and working on your running stride or doing any track repeats to go and run in some soft sand. It's more about just sort of like chugging away. So I don't think my natural running stride would lend itself to doing MDS. But then I think probably with MDS, there's a lot more of it on sort of like harder riverbed type terrain than you'd think as well. So it would be interesting to try, but it's not something I've really like considered as a priority within the next couple of years.
And for CCC, who are you seeing as kind of your big rival out there? I've not looked at all at the start list. Have you got people in mind who you think are going to be your challenges?
I'm not really sure. I haven't looked. Like, literally, I've spent so much time and effort sewing my race vest in certain places, trying different bottle setups, like working on getting my gear down like as small as possible, and like sorting out all that stuff. I haven't actually really looked at the competition, because at the end of the day, it's sort of like a race of you against the course. And if I can do the course as fast as I can, if I win, I kind of win. And obviously I might use other athletes to sort of like push myself to try and run faster, but really I guess it is me against the course. I do know Petter Engdahl is racing, and he just did a good sort of 60k race last weekend, and there is definitely like some other guys around, but I really haven't paid so much attention.
And
UTMB
mentioned earlier about.
I'm looking forward to watching UTMB.
Which one's first? CCC is first, right?
CCC, is on the Friday, I think, and then the UTMB starts 4 p.m. on the Saturday normally, I think, something like that. And we've got sort of like the Killian
out there to watch.
Yeah, Killian versus whatchamacallit, the American guy. I should definitely have remembered that name.
Oh yes, of course, he's back, isn't he, Jim?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He's been living in the Alps for 2 months now, maybe 3, really working on it. So he is putting all his eggs in that basket. So to see them race, but then some other guys are really good. It's going to be like a really good UTMB, like Pal Gopel, the Dynafit guy. Yeah, I'm just really excited to. I've never been someone that watches sport, and I've never really watched. And running isn't the first one that I would have started watching, but actually, like, I've got more excited about watching some races, especially with the live coverage improving too. To actually almost become sort of like a bit like slow TV, to watch this like GPS trackers and time splits and stuff is relatively fun.
And I think Jim, when we were at Mont Blanc, he ran the OCC as a training run on the same day as the Mont Blanc Marathon, because MK, he was one of the racers who was meeting him for pizza afterwards. So it sounds like he's really getting to know the route incredibly well. So you've got to think this is, if any year is going to be his year, it's going to be this year or next year. And how have you, talking about Killian, you mentioned how you train a lot with him now, or you're in the same area. You can see kind of make sense of his Strava, his training runs a lot more because you actually understand the terrain and the intensity of them. Like, what kind of, are you picking up lots of tips? Or?
Yeah, like loads, a lot. I think Killian, like there's this sort of like, perception from Instagram of just like who he is and stuff. And I think like not a lot, there's a lot of stuff which like isn't completely true. And you should always take everything with a grain of salt. And it's been great to actually like see him in training and actually see one of the main ones. It's like, I've like definitely heard a quote that he said one time. It's like, oh, I don't really train for races, just maybe 1 or 2 sessions in the week before. It's like that might have been the case then, but now it's like he trains for races. He's scientific. He is specifically preparing. He is like is a numbers guy. He's got Excel spreadsheets. He knows how to train himself, and he's doing it from like the word go. Like we started training for this season pretty much like at a similar time last December. And he's training, and that's a big thing for me to see, because now I'm like, oh wait a sec, it's not just about always going out and having fun. You need to actually apply yourself. So that was one of the main ones that I've had a takeaway. And also this sort of like zone 2 steady training is a big one as well, because like at one point we're running together and he goes, I never run this slowly. He's always pushing a tiny little bit, and it's like, wait a sec, you're not meant to push a little bit. You're meant to go real slow. You're meant to be plodding, and it turns out that actually plodding is bad because you're not biomechanically moving like you would do in the race. So actually to do a lot more of this sort of like middle intensity is actually what he does. So it's like, oh, that's interesting. And I tried myself and found it was a game changer. But I will say there is like obviously a caveat that if you go and run all your miles at this sort of like high zone 2 kind of heart rate, or effort level on the road, you will probably end up injured at some point. So having a good form of cross training you can do in the winter, say like biking or for us skiing in the winter, so you can do a lot more hours, a little bit harder, without that sort of like running impact, so you can limit the injury risk, is like crazy. I think in the future it's going to be hard for especially ultra runners to perform at their absolute best if they try and do 100% of their training running, because they'll just all end up really injured. So to have a form of cross training so you can build a massive engine, but then transform that into the running is a really powerful tool. And that's something else that I saw from Killian, but something else I was already doing a bit myself because I had the foot injury.
And even looking at if you look at some of the insanely fast 5K times of triathletes, people like Alex Yee and Beth, both of them, they're doing such high mileage overall, but not that high on running, and so but they're still getting that super quick time because, as you say, their lungs and their overall capacity for endurance is so much higher. Well, if people want to use the app, then what's the best way for them to kind of try it, find it, get involved?
You go on to either Apple or Google and you type in Albon app, and then it comes up. You go through like a little Pokemon style demo where it teaches you like a little bit how it works, because it is a very different system to just buying a training plan. It's like a lot more interactive, and it is more of like a tool to coach yourself. So you have to have an active interest in your own fitness and what you are preparing for, and use it accordingly. It's not
that's half the do badders out then.
Exactly. So to sort of like get an understanding of the training philosophy and actually to sort of like use the app actively to coach yourself is really important. But it does cost money, but you do get a week free when you put your bank details in. I'll probably be able to make up a discount code so you get 2 weeks free if you type in Bad Boy Running or something, or we can make one up for after.
Let's do FYB. FYB is in Funky Buddy. Everyone knows that one. So, and how many times how many names did you come up with before Albon app?
I was like coming up with all these names, and it's actually 4 of us. It's myself, Henrietta, Lou is the software engineer, he's French, and then Ross Brackley. And I got outvoted to call it Albon app. I don't know, we couldn't come up with any other name. It seemed to fit. It's it's mine and Henrietta's training philosophy, so we just called it that, and that was that. Like, it's really like the name isn't important, how it looks isn't important. It's really about the philosophy, and I think that's what we're most proud of. It's like it's a different system to plan your training. It's a different philosophy than you might expect, and it really does help. Like, I'm using it religiously in my own training, but you can change this commitment level. So people with a full-time job and a family can use it as well. They'll get a different concoction of different intensities, but they can still use it. It's got strength training in there, and you can. It's got like a follow-along timer. So there'll be a little video of me doing my crunches or my pull-ups or something like that, and you just follow along. So it generally does make life easier on the training front, but it is very much a sort of like tick cross. Firstly, like as to whether you're getting the intensity done in the week or the right concoction of intensities, but then you do get examples of sessions you can do, so you can choose individual sessions. So that's another way you can actually use it. But it doesn't show your heart rate data. It doesn't show your paces and stuff. It's, did you do this session or not? And for me, that's the most important thing. Did I do leg strength this week? Yes or no? Yes or no. That's the most important thing. It doesn't really matter if I had 110 heart rate or 112. It's like, did I do it or not? And as long as you see that, then that is the most important thing, because that leads to continuity, and continuity is the most important thing to becoming a good athlete. It's just doing that leg strength once a week during the winter, every single week through the entire winter, and like getting 3-4 months, and then the next winter doing it, and then the next winter, then after 3-4 years, you'll be a completely different person.
Well, thank you for that, and we'll message offline and set up FYB or something similar if people want to use it. And are we going to see you at the World Champs this year for obstacle racing, do you think? Or
it's very close to the Trail World Championship, so I doubt it. It's just a couple of weeks before, I think. Yeah, I know. And also, last year I did keep with the obstacle race training, and I was doing definitely I've got like this fancy hanging system with a hangboard, and you have a pulley system that removes weight off your body, so you can hang for longer at sort of lighter intensity and stuff. And I was still doing a lot of that. This year, since like traveling a lot, getting sick and stuff, I have fallen off the bandwagon a little bit. I still think I could do really well, but it would mean dedicating a bit of extra time, definitely after CCC, towards that. And I think definitely Team GB are going to want all that effort put into the trail running world champs. So at the moment, it's a no, but I mean, who knows? I do like to plan the season as I go along. I have sort of like a rough plan, but we shall see.
Well, if post trail champs, if you're looking for something, I'm sure Ultra-X would throw you a free multi-day place in Mexico, which is meant to be amazing in November. But well, Jon, thanks so much for coming back on again. If people want to kind of follow you, I know your blog is obviously still hugely important and really good insight as well. Is that just jonalbon.com?
Something like that, or Jonathan Albon. Like you'll find it. And my Instagram is Jon Albon or Jonathan Albon, one of the two. But the type of social media I like the most is Strava, because that's data driven. You can't lie. It's like, you did this. So actually Strava is what I use alongside the app for the data. And I've started writing like a weekly blog on my training, how the week went. I put in like the screenshots of what the app told me to do and how I did it, and what I did and how it felt, and how I'm going to plan the next week and stuff. So on every single session, I write down what intensity it was, and when people start using the app, they'll actually sort of connect the dots and see what that means. And then also try and keep this sort of weekly blog going, just sort of like a little bit of insight into how I plan my training and how the training gets done, and what the different sort of like feelings are when I'm doing it.
And I mean that sounds very sensible actually, and just very insightful. And I'm guessing it's sounding like probably not to see your head at any more Golden Trail this season.
It possibly could be Stranda. Like my shape is still way beneath where I want it to be, and the feeling still isn't good after the COVID, and the heart rate is still definitely elevated, and I need to be very cautious. But I mean, there are people that have won skiing world championships 4 weeks after they have COVID, for example. I'm going to go on recce the Stranda course a week before, and it could just be that I try and include it as a training race, which I don't want to do. When I turn up and race, I want to race, you know? but it might be that it would be fun. So maybe I'll do that. Sierra Zinal is still like a possibly. Like, I'm trying to tell myself that I'm not going to do it, because then I can train for CCC, I can get healthy, I can sort of relieve that sort of like psychological pressure of thinking, crap, that's going to be a really tough race that I should prepare 100% for. So really everything at the moment is on CCC, but who knows? We'll see how the shape develops in the next couple of weeks and see how I feel about doing some racing.
Well, thanks so much for coming on, and fingers crossed. Well, not fingers crossed, but hopefully see you at Stranden in 2 weeks or so.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm just hoping the weather improves up here in time for the race, because it's not been the nicest of summers thus far.
Yeah, well, I bring the sunshine. You should know that by now. Cheers,
Sounds good. We need it. Cheers, man.
So there you go, Deep Batters. Always loved Jon because he's just a lovely guy. So fascinating that it's almost stayed with him the very beginning of obstacle racing, that thought of, if I'm doing well, it's not because I'm good, it's because yada, yada, yada. It's not a competitive sport. Not that many people do it. It's not as big as other sports. And even now that it's only recently, and speaking to him after Mont Blanc, it still sounds like he's, and I'm not sure how much of that is humility, and how much is still that, well, am I that good? And I don't know what it'll take. Winning CCC, would that be enough? Winning UTMB, would that be? I mean, he's world trail champion, and yet he still has that kind of thought at the back of his mind, which is fascinating. But maybe that's what fuels him to a certain extent. But have a look at the app. Briggs was using it before she went off the rails and just had a heavy booze up session over the summer. But she said that they're really good videos to use, really easy to see, and actually she liked the fact that, particularly if you're a busy person, because it gives you different options. It's not a regimented day. You can choose between your different options for your leg strength day, for example, whether it's like a hill training session or an indoor body weight session for your legs, and just made it a lot more achievable to actually be able to do things like strength training and actually integrate it sensibly into your training. But yeah, download the app. FYB will be the code we'll set up for that. If you've got any future guests you'd like to recommend, then message me, david@badboyrunning.com. If you like this episode, the previous one with Jon, I can't remember what it was. I can't remember what we were talking about, but it would have been, I think, during his transition into trail from obstacle racing. So he'd have been maybe 3 times obstacle race champion rather than 5 or 6 time double obstacle race champion. Other episodes that you might find interesting. Ryan Atkins, really good one. He won the World's Toughest Mudder several times and did the 24-hour race with Jon. And he switched to trail as part of his training over lockdown, set the record for the most descent in 24 hours. That was a really good episode. In terms of other people who've kind of been newer into trail, we spoke to Tom Evans after his MDS, we mentioned on the podcast, where he was ex-army, but had been a very good runner previously and just came out and bossed it at the MDS, led out the first 2 days unbelievably in the desert against the established Moroccans. Incredible to see. And if you want to talk a bit more UTMB, we spoke to Pau Capet and Jim Walmsley. Pau about his win, Jim about his career, but also his move to France and the motivation behind that. So thanks for listening, guys. If you've liked this, please do subscribe. Please do review us. It can be as silly as you like, but it really helps get guests on the podcast. And we will see you next time. Bye 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 bye.
Fuck you, buddy.